How are you?
I am doing really well, and it's a pleasure to see you, if only on Zoom, and to talk with you again.
It's also a great pleasure for me. We shared some very special moments at St. Joseph's University, at the Gregorian University. We shared the encounter, the meeting in order to study together about the Prushim, the Pharisees, and I learned a little bit about the story of your life, and your roots are, let us say, very traditional Jewish roots. I understood from our talkings that your family belong to I refer to your parents, the house where you were born and where you were educated, that they are conservatives of the right wing, or some plus conservative. So how is that you suddenly was so interested in studying, analyzing, and devoting the best of your intellectual efforts and capabilities in order to know about Christianity and about the New Testament?
Right. Well, so my family was, we went to a conservative synagogue. We sort of kept kosher at home, but we certainly did not keep kosher when we went out to restaurants. My father thought that a great thing to do in the evening, he would say to me, go grab a copy of the old Jewish encyclopedia, from like 1919, the big black one. And he would open it at random and he would say, tonight we will read about something. So the household was very Jewish identified, in part in terms of practice, but very much in terms of culture. This is what Jews are in terms of history. This is what Jews have believed. These are the things that Jews argue about. But the neighborhood where I grew up was almost entirely Portuguese Roman Catholic. So all of my friends were Catholic, and we used to talk about religion. So we'd get on the school bus, and they would have had religious education in the church, and I would have had religious education in the afternoon after public school. And they'd say, well, we have this guy named Moses. And I'd say, we have Moses. And they would talk about Abraham and say, we have Abraham. And then they would talk about all these other people, like Jesus and Mary and a Joseph, son of Jacob, but not the one I knew from Genesis. So I would ask my parents about this, and my parents explained to me that Christianity, which for us meant Roman Catholicism, Christianity was very much like Judaism. We worshiped the same God, the one who created heaven and earth. We prayed some of the same prayers, and particularly the Psalms. We took authority from the same books, whether it was Genesis or Deuteronomy or Isaiah, although we interpreted them differently. And that for my Christian friends, a bunch of Jewish people like Jesus and Mary and Joseph, Mary's husband, and Paul, they were all Jews. So my initial sense was that Christianity was like a branch of Judaism, which historically it was. And then I realized that there were differences. When I was 7 years old, a little girl said to me, "You killed our Lord." And I said, "I didn't kill anybody." And she said, "Yes, you did. Our priest said so." And this is something called Vatican II had already started, but one of the later documents of Vatican II, a text called Nostra Aetate, Latin for in our time, had not yet been promulgated. So that was October of 1965. This was before. I'm old. So I could not understand how this tradition that was so much like Judaism, with the same Bible in part and the same God and the same prayers and a Jewish man named Jesus, why were people in this tradition saying horrible things about me? Why were they accusing me personally of killing Jesus or of killing God? So I started to ask questions. My friends went to religious education class after school, as did I, but in different locations. So I announced to my parents that I wanted to go to religious education class with my friends, who call it catechism, to find out where this hateful teaching had come from. I'm 7 years old and I'm going to end the anti-Semitism. I thought it was a translation problem because in Hebrew school, I was learning Hebrew and I figured, well, maybe this was a translation issue. Nobody told me the New Testament was written in Greek, but I had very wise parents. And my mother said to me, as long as you remember who you are, go, you might learn something. It's good to know about other people's religious traditions. So I started to go to religious education class with my Catholic friends. And the teachers loved me because I'm the only 7-year-old who wants to be in religious education class. And I really liked the stories because the stories that I heard sounded like the stories that I was hearing in the synagogue. About a fellow who could do miracles. And I thought, well, like Eliyahu Hanavi, like Elijah the prophet, and Elisha, and Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa, and Rabbi Honi. So I thought, okay, so Jesus is like another Jewish miracle worker. Got that. I knew that Jesus talked in parables, but I knew the prophet Nathan talked in parables to King David. And there are parables in the historical sources, and the Midrashim are full of parables. So I thought, oh, this Jesus, he's a really good Jewish storyteller. I didn't hear anything in these classes that was anti-Jewish, and I was listening. And I don't think that my teachers were thinking, well, let's wait for the little Levine girl to be on vacation, or maybe those Jewish holidays in September and October, and then we'll do all the bad Jew stuff. They just did not read with hate. So that when I finally sat down and read the New Testament, this was many years later, two things occurred to me. The first was that the New Testament is Jewish history. Some of it is written by Jews, like the letters of Paul, who's clearly Jewish, he's a Pharisee. They're about Jews, like Jesus and all the Marys and Peter and James, they're all Jews. And that over the centuries, interpretation of the New Testament has impacted Jewish-Christian relations, and often not for very good, for very positive readings. So I thought, this is Jewish history, and it was not the history I was learning in the synagogue, because in the synagogue, we were good up until the Maccabees, the Hanukkah story, and then suddenly, like magic, we were in the Mishnah. So for first century, this is material that I needed. And the other thing that occurred to me was that we choose how to read. I did not have the language for it at the time. Today, we would call this hermeneutics. And I thought, well, the people in church who were teaching me the Gospels and who were teaching me Paul chose to read in a way that loved Jews rather than hated Jews. But you could read the New Testament and come out hating Jews. It's very, very easy to do. So I thought, if anybody will teach me what that mechanism is, what that switch is, so I could teach people how to read the New Testament and not hate Jews, I want to be able to do that. So I can teach Christians when they preach in churches, or when they teach in Bible studies, or in religious education classes, or when they teach children. Make sure that you do not introduce anti-Semitism. Make sure you do not introduce the hatred of Jews into how you teach the Bible. And I've been doing that for well over half a century now, and it seems to be working pretty well.
Yeah, and your work gave very good fruits. For instance, I saw the Jewish annotated New Testament that I suppose that this is a fruit, especially, okay, although it's the work of many of scholars, but the alma mater, I felt that the alma mater behind the whole book are you. And where are we standing nowadays in the dialogue between, because from the story of your life, we can understand, I mean that I understood so on this way, and those who are going to listen to this recording, they will also understand that a primary intention in your life was, okay, they are our neighbors. I would like to understand what their belief is about, and who they are really. And so your primary first intention is dialogue. dialogue with your neighbors, the one who is very, very close to you and this I would like, as an Argentinian, I would like to underline this, what I'm going to say now, in a really, in comparison with Argentina and other countries, and on much more on those years, with a very democratic country or milieu, because I know what is to live in a democratic country, and I can give you a lot of examples, of existential examples of what it meant to live in the United States. I don't know if to call that exactly democratic, not democratic, but a different country than where I passed the majority of my life in Argentina. For instance, the best example that I can give you is the assimilation of the Jews, of the generation of Jews that came to the United States, and the first generation of Jews that came from Poland to Argentina. My grandparents, their Spanish very difficultly they could express them Spanish after many, many years living in Argentina. All the milieu of them was a Jewish milieu. They spoke in Yiddish with their neighbors, and they lived inside some kind, I would say, ghetto in Argentina, a ghetto built up by themselves. Here, what I see is that the interaction, and this is a consequence of this milieu. So having in mind this milieu, I can imagine that on some more spontaneous way, without so many difficulties on the way, it came in your mind, okay, I would like to have a really dialogue with my neighbors. And so the dialogical idea of a dialogue, much more since Nostra Aetate onwards, came in your heart, in your mind. So where are we standing now in the dialogue?
I think it's fair to describe how I grew up as similar to the way you grew up, is the Jewish neighborhood, but then reaching out to other neighbors. But here in the United States, there are some Jewish communities where there is no dialogue whatsoever, that Jewish kids go to Jewish schools and they shop in Jewish stores and they read Jewish newspapers, and they become actually quite isolated. We have the same thing, by the way, in the United States with certain Christian groups, so that I retired from Vanderbilt University in 2021, but before that, in master's classes, so graduate classes for people who want to be Christian ministers, some of my students would say, I've never met a Jew before, because there were none in their neighborhoods, there were none in their cities. So in a sense, I was lucky in that I had a strong Jewish community to support me, but I also had my Christian neighbors. So the opportunity for that conversation was there. Where are we? It's kind of like doing the tango. It's 2 steps forward, and then it's 1 step back, and then a couple of steps to the side, and then you turn around. So are we better than we were 60 years ago? Absolutely. Nostra Aetate made a huge amount of difference in Roman Catholic teaching. And then a number of Protestant groups said, let's try to start avoiding anti-Jewish teaching. That's fine. Are we as far as we might be? Not at all. And we're seeing some sort of regress, because what I found in a number of church contexts and even in divinity school education is that the faculty and the students don't see anti-Semitism to be a problem. There are other problems that need to be addressed. So for a number of divinity schools, Jews all code as white, and we are not Jews. Jews are Black, Jews are Asian, Jews are Hispanic, clearly. That we're all rich, we should be so lucky. That we're part of the problem rather than ourselves a minoritized group who sometimes suffers because of that minority issues. And when I point out to some of my students the anti-Semitism that even shows up in their sermons and their papers, there's a a sense of fragility here, as if, oh, I'm not referring to all Jews, well, it's just rhetoric. It really doesn't mean anything. Well, rhetoric means a lot. What we say means a lot. So even in Jewish-Christian dialogue, when anti-Judaism is pointed out to Christians, Christians typically back off. I've compared this to what we would call in the United States white fragility. So when people who code white are told, well, that's a racist comment that you just made, or that's a racist presupposition, white people go, oh, well, I didn't mean it, or you're exaggerating, or there are problems. And there's a sense of deflecting rather than taking responsibility for saying things that are harmful and then trying to deal with it. Churches across the board have written statements about how churches don't want to be anti-Semitic, and that Jesus is Jewish and Paul is Jewish. The problem is that so few people read those statements. They're written by professional interfaith dialogue people who only talk to each other. So a rabbi might talk to a bishop, but people in the local synagogue and the local church have no idea what they've talked about, because those conversations do not filter down. There's still strongly problematic material in Christian lectionaries, which is the Parsha HaShavua for Christians, Catholics, Orthodox, mainline Protestants. And for years, every year, different Christian groups say, well, maybe we want to revise the lectionary, maybe we want to change the readings, and nothing gets done, or very little gets done. Because as they say, well, it's tradition, we've always done it this way. But that doesn't make it right. Right. What could say the Roman Catholic Church? They had always said the Jews killed Jesus until 1965, when they determined we didn't. Things can be changed, and they can be changed by better historical knowledge, which is where I work because I'm an historian. They can be changed by better sensitivity. Does this hurt the neighbor? Well, if so, maybe we ought to do some changing. They can be changed when people who are in positions of authority do more than have meetings, but actually go back to their churches or go back to their synagogues and say, here's what congregations need to know. Here's what children need to know in terms of religious education. Here's what cantors need to know and worship leaders need to know, because some anti-Jewish material shows up in Christian hymnals. So there's more work that needs to be done. If the dialogue just stays with the professionals, nothing is going to happen.
The current Pope Francis, when he was Archbishop of Buenos Aires, and me understood very, very well that the dialogue could not be also only among us. We must to open the dialogue, to show our dialogue, to share our dialogue with everyone. So in order to do that, we published a book in 2010. It was afterwards translated into English, on Heaven and Earth. And we also recorded 31 television programs that were presented, and he founded a channel, the channel of the Archbishop, or Archbishop's channel. And the program was dialogues moderated by an pastor, evangelical pastor, and he moderated the dialogue between both of us. So we did many things. I wrote many things in books, chapters, in order to tell our story. And this reminds me of the first conversation that I had with Francis when, after he was elected Pope. I told him, after the surprising of his call, and how do you feel, and this and that, and the joke that he joked with me that really wasn't so a joke, because we were very close, and he had a lot of really very, very good friends in Argentina. So it was not so simple suddenly from one day to the other to know, okay, there is there is an ocean and there is a half of a Mediterranean between me and my friends. So his first commentary to me was, look, I was caught here by the people and they don't let me go back to Argentina. It was a joke, but I felt, and afterwards I saw that it wasn't absolutely a joke. He suffered from this uprooting. So all the time, in this first conversation, going ahead with this story, is I told him, look, we must open our friendship for the world, because our friendship and the way that we built up our friendship and the dialogue, this must transcend. This cannot remain among us. And of course, that he agreed to that absolutely. Tell me, what did you find really in the New Testament? How, after so many years of research in the New Testament, how should a Jew, putting aside all the 2,000 years of clashes and of misunderstandings, and okay, we know the story, the history, but if we try to build a new reality, we already began building this reality through this era of dialogue. How should we Jews look, understand the Christian world?
Yeah. There are various ways of getting at it. It seems to me that if I, as a Jew, want my Christian neighbors to know more about Judaism than current news from the Middle East, the Shoah, the Holocaust, and maybe a menorah in on some public land, that we Jews might know more about Christians than Santa Claus in the mall, and kind of right-wing Christian nationalists who say if you don't worship Jesus, you should probably leave the country. So I think we owe each other a type of mutual respect, which means not only being familiar with the New Testament, but also being familiar with how it's interpreted. In the same way, some of my Christian friends think that if they just read Leviticus, they know what Jews are doing in the local synagogue. And we're not, right? I had one student actually ask me, how do we do animal sacrifices and where do we get the cows? And I said, no, we haven't been doing animal sacrifices since the year 70. They were very surprised. We just can't look at Leviticus and see. No. So understanding Christianity is more than knowing what's in the New Testament. It's knowing how that material has been interpreted over time. Just as understanding Judaism it requires knowing what's in Torah, but you have to see how that text has been interpreted in various ways over time. Part of it is simply having the courage to ask questions. What does that symbol mean? What does that practice mean? Why are you bringing a pine tree into your house and putting tinsel on it in December? What does that have to do with the birth of Jesus? Which is sort of like saying, why are you eating potato latkes in December? What does that have to do with the Maccabees? So we start asking each other questions. I think it helps if we visit each other's houses of worship, not to pray, but to experience what that might be like. So I will frequently bring my Christian students to my shul, to my synagogue, so they could see what Orthodox Judaism looks like, modern Orthodox Judaism. I will go to churches so I can experience, here's what Lutherans do, here's what Presbyterians do, here's what Catholics do. And at the same time, I think we need to use what Leviticus calls tochecha, rebuke. Leviticus says if you see your neighbor doing something that's wrong, you're supposed to say something. And I think that fits with Jewish Christian dialogue as well. So that when I hear ministers or priests or religious educators saying something that's incorrect about Judaism, then I write to them or I speak to them and I ask them to make a correction. And at the same time, when I hear rabbis make false statements about Christians and Christianity, and I've heard that happen as well, then I correct them. I think better clergy education is extremely important. Christians need to know more about Jesus' Jewish context, and they don't, which is in part why we had this big conference about the Pharisees. I mean, who actually were they? So Christians need better education about Jewish history, and I think Jews need better education about Christian origins also. And that's a problem for how do you train rabbis and how do you train priests and pastors?
And as an historian, how do you read? What are your feelings and your understandings when you read the New Testament? I know to read the New Testament for me is to enter, I would say, to enter slowly in the Greek world. What means? Or in the Hellenistic world, excuse me. Hellen, not the Hellen, the Hellenic world, but the Hellenistic world. Why? When I read the synoptics, evangelions, gospels, excuse me, because I had the Spanish word in my mind. That is the first. We haven't gospels. We have evangelios. Okay, I feel a little bit strange, but they are very Jewish. I see the correlations between, this I can find in the Talmud, and here Jesus has the same opinion as Rabbi Akiva, and here, okay, what Stark and Billenbeck did in Germany at the beginning of the 20th century, this great encyclopedia showing the correlation between the Talmud and the New Testament. But afterwards, when I enter into the fourth gospel in John, so at the beginning it was the Logos. Oh gosh. When I began studying that by myself, reading this by myself, I said Logos, this is a little bit Hellenistic, okay, close to Philo from Alexandria, but okay. Afterwards, slowly, I am entering in another world with a rabbinic Jewish roots, but the problems that they are facing, the subjects that they are facing, salvation and so on and so on, okay, are very Jewish. But the approach, I read that in Spanish, not in Greek. Hebrew Bible, of course, that everything is in Hebrew. But to know Koine, impossible. I hadn't time to do that, to study that in my life. So how do you feel? What's your interpretation?
Well, right.
How, as an historian, I know you can write a book about that, or many books about that. But imitating Hillel, standing on one, when the very famous story of Hillel, define me all the Bible on the time that I can stand on one foot. So
Judaism has never existed in a background, in a vacuum, right? Jews have always been part of a broader world. So to read Hellenistic Jewish material like the Gospels is very similar to reading books like First and Second Maccabees, which I know Jews don't read. We get the holiday of Hanukkah. The church has the books of the Maccabees. That's all very Hellenistic. To read about a movement that's centered on one charismatic individual who says, I understand what Torah means. It's exactly the same thing in the Dead Sea Scrolls, where the so-called teacher of righteousness, the Moreh HaTzedek, he understands what the prophet Nahum did not understand, or what Habakkuk did not understand. So he knows what this means. To have a group of Jews saying, I need to interpret the Torah in my own way, and I will disagree with Pharisees over here or Sadducees. Well, that's so Jewish, right? So the idea that Jesus would debate other Jews on how to follow Torah, what could be more Jewish than that? Jesus is, I believe, attempting to prepare his people for the inbreaking of what he calls the kingdom of God. Jews would typically use temporal language like the Olam Haba, the world to come. And if the world to come is coming, then what do you do given that urgency? So what he's doing is he's saying the kingdom of God is about to break and the Olam Haba is about to come. How do you live in that light? So his teachings make perfect sense in a first century Jewish world, occupied by Rome to be sure, but still very, very Jewish. So that when my Jewish students read Matthew, they think, boy, this guy sounds like a rabbi. You know, he debates with other rabbis. He's telling his disciples, do this and do that. Sometimes he gets angry. Sometimes he's compassionate. It's very Jewish. And even in the Gospel of John, which starts out, in the beginning was the word and arche ein ho logos. Well, if you read the Targums, the Aramaic paraphrases to Torah, well, they use the word memra as a way of talking about God, because God creates by word, God creates by speech. So that if you were to say to an Aramaic speaking Jew, in the beginning was the memra, bereshit ha-memra, the Jew's going to go, yeah, nothing new there. So what we get is what musicians would call variations on a theme. Right? You have the basic idea, and then the Christians are going to play it in their way, and rabbinic Jews are going to play it in a different way, and the people who wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls are going to play it in a different way. But they're all kind of playing the same song.
A good answer. All of them, because as I told you at the end of the question, at the beginning, I feel it's very absolutely Jewish, as you remarked. But at the end, there are, of course, that I recognize a lot of Jewish issues, but in the context of on a grand context of Hellenistic or the Hellenistic world. Let us talk now about another issue. How to talk about Israel, how to analyze Israel in the Jewish Christian, the Jewish Catholic, Jewish Christian dialogue, the state of Israel, of course.
Yes. But see, Jews can't even talk with Jews about that. I mean, leaving aside talking with Christians, you have liberal Jews who are very much in favor of statehood for Palestinians, who are very critical of settlement expansion, who are very, very critical of the current government that Mr. Netanyahu has put together. And I would count myself among them. And then you have other Jews who are saying, no, the entire land belongs, to the Jewish people, and there should be no Palestinian state, and the Palestinians should all go somewhere else. So it's very difficult to talk about Jews and Christians speaking about Israel when Jews can't even talk with fellow Jews about Israel. Even in my own shul, I get into arguments with, the people who sit next to me, who are so thrilled about this new coalition government. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, it's horrible. So one thing that Christians have to learn here is that not all Jews think the same way about, well, anything. And we certainly don't think the same way about Israel. What I would like is for Christians to become a little bit more aware of why Jews are concerned regarding Israel in the first place. And part of that's education. In the synagogue, on Shabbat morning, we're going to hear the promise of the land over and over and over again to Abraham and to Isaac and to Jacob, and Joseph, who wants to go back to the land, and Moses leading the people to the land. It's all land focused. Churches don't hear those verses. The Christian lectionaries skip them because the land wasn't important to these early followers. They thought the kingdom of God was about to break in. And the Gentile church didn't have any concern for the land until Constantine became emperor, and suddenly they owned it. So to understand that Jews, that we're not just a religion, we're not just a faith community, we're an we're a people. And a people has a homeland, and a people has a language, and a people has an ancestry and a history. So for Christians to understand that we're not just another religion or another faith community, we're a people, and that people has a concern for their homeland, which happens to be the land of Israel. For me, the homeland is also the homeland of the Palestinian people. And then we have to figure out, how do we work this out so that we can have the shalom, the salam that Jews and Christians and Muslims all want to talk about? And how can we have people in government with enough courage to do the difficult negotiation that needs to be done?
I remind now that many, many years ago, 50 years ago, one of my teachers in Argentina, an important rabbi from Israel, that served as a chief rabbi in Argentina. I was invited to serve as chief rabbi. I had the personal, because in the class we are two, really. It was at the high school for Jewish studies, Midrasha Ivrit in Argentina. So I remember that on some opportunity, he spoke about what is really Judaism, the Jewish people. So he said about your answer, and the way as the Christians are looking on us, and they are not understanding that we are not merely only a community of faith. He said the best definition about what is the Judaism was given by Ruth when she said to Naomi, "Your people are going to be my people. Your God is going to be my God. And the place where you are going to be buried is going to be the place, which is the earth." We are all the things, all the three things at the same time, because our history began much, much earlier than the Greco-Roman concepts of nation, state, country, religion. And regarding Israel and the Catholic view of about Israel, I would like to share with you something that very often Jews didn't pay attention to this fact. The first pope that went to Har Herzl, to the tomb of Herzl, and put flowers honoring the memory of Herzl was Francis. And I stood very close to him. On his right stood Netanyahu, on his left was Shimon Peres. And this was a great moment. But on the same way on which he put the hands on the wall, but for sure you remember when he was in Palestine, he put his hands on the wall and remained some minutes in meditation and praying. On the same way, he honored the idea of Zionism, the idea of the right to the Jewish people for the land. Of course, and he said, must be also a place for the Palestinians. Living now, the last question. We are living now in a very difficult world, very difficult. What is going on in Ukraine is terrible. I know that our sages in the Talmud say that after the generation of Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi, the last prophets, Pascha Nevuah Israel, there is no more prophetism in Israel. But even so, we are living in a very dark world. can you see some lights in this darkness, in the middle of this darkness?
And since we're talking right before Hanukkah, that's a good question to ask. Sure. My co-editor, Mark Brettler, who worked with me on the Jewish Annotated New Testament, he and I presented a copy of this volume to Pope Francis at St. Peter's Square. And the Pope, he's very friendly. So he reached out and he put his hand on my hand and he said, "Good work, do more." You know, that's lovely. And the volume, by the way, has just been translated into German. So that internationally, we're seeing more of a recognition of a better understanding of Jesus' Jewish context. I got to teach at the Pontifical Biblical Institute in Rome, where you and I got to go to the Vatican together in spring of 2019, so that Catholic organizations would hire a Jewish woman to teach New Testament. That's something new, and I think it's something good. Rabbis globally are learning more about early Christianity, and Christian ministers and priests are learning more about early Judaism. That's good. It's just a matter of people of goodwill speaking out. When anti-Semites, and we've heard from a lot of them recently, take to Twitter or take to television or radio and make negative statements, it's the responsibility of everybody to write in and do something. And people are in fact doing that. So anti-Semitism is not going to go away any more than racism is going to go away and hatred of gay people is going to go away. All those hatreds are going to stay in place, but you can chip away at them piece by piece. And where I take my hope is, well, I've made a correction here and I've made a correction here. And sometimes I feel like I'm trying to empty the ocean with a tiny spoon, but at least I'm doing something. And when people write to me, and they do constantly, to say, "Oh, I just spoke with my priest about that homily because it was anti-Jewish. And he said, oh, I hadn't realized that. Thank you for letting me know." Or if people read my books and they write to me and said, "Oh, I've always thought this, and now I realize I'm wrong." Those little moments that you were able to create in your friendship with Francis, that I've been able to create in my friendship with Christian leaders and my Christian students and with congregations, the very fact that you're taping these conversations and that people will actually listen to them, that's where the hope is. And it's just a tiny, tiny little bit of light, like a candle only offers just a little bit of light, but it's enough to keep you going.
A great lesson. It's enough to keep going. And let us live in the hands of God to do something for all of us. My dear Amy-Jill, thanks a lot for this very special moment, for this conversation, which we try to deep a little bit in our thoughts, in our dreams for a better world. And I wish you Shabbat Shalom Mevorach. And this is a very special Shabbat because we will have the candles for Shabbat in order to receive Shabbat. And afterwards, on Sunday, we'll light on the candles to receive Hanukkah. And it's the same fire. It's a fire of commitment to take a small spoon and to do a little bit in order to maintain alive the fire. A last word. I had a great friend, a great rabbi from Israel, Shmuel Avidora Cohen, and he wrote a book for Parshat HaShavua, Parshat HaShavua, for the name of the book is Likrat Shabbat, to receive, to go and receive Shabbat, to face Shabbat. So in the parasha Behalotcha, in the book of Numbers, where appears how the menorah had to be lighted on by the Kohen, by the priest, he put this commentary: when the Romans destroyed Jerusalem and they took the menorah from the temple of Jerusalem. Okay, they took the menorah, but the fire remained in us, with us. So thanks for the fire, or for helping us maintaining the fire of hope. A constructive fire, very interesting fire you have, could be to construct something with the fire or to destroy. Okay, we are trying to construct, to work a lot with the constructive fire.
Absolutely.
Thanks a lot. Shabbat Shalom Mevorach. Chanukah Sameach.
Happy Hanukkah. Good Shabbos.